verse, it describes some characteristics of God. It says, merciful, gracious, long-suffering, and abounding in goodness. And I think it's just interesting that a few verses later, in that same chapter, verse 14, it gives another characteristic that kind of stands out from the bunch. So, Exodus 34, verse 14. It says, "For you shall worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God." So God is long-suffering, abounding in goodness, merciful, He's gracious, but He's jealous? That doesn't make any sense. How can a loving God be a jealous God? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about God's jealousy, why He's jealous, and what it means for us. One of my favorite examples of jealousy in the Bible, and something that I think we can get a lot from, is in Exodus chapter 32. At this point, Moses is still talking to God on Mount Sinai. He's been up there for a little while. And in verse 1 of chapter 32, we're going to see what happens. "Now when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered to Aaron and said to him, 'Come, make us gods that shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him.' And Aaron said to them, 'Break off the golden earrings which are in your ears, of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me.' So that all the people broke off the golden earrings which were in their ears, and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned with it an engraving tool, and made a molded calf. Then he said, 'This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" So they don't know what's become of Moses, and what I imagine is kind of a bit of a panic. They make this golden calf, and they worship and they sacrifice to this golden calf. Well, we just read that God is a jealous God, and you shall worship no other gods than the Lord your God. So, cut back to the scene on Mount Sinai in verse 7, and we see God's reaction. Verse 7 says, "And the Lord said to Moses, 'Go, get down, for the people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded calf, and worshipped it, and sacrificed to it, and said, This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation.'" So God is jealous here. God is furious. He is angry. He's angry that the people that were just so recently freed from slavery or captivity in Egypt for years are so quickly turning their attention and their worship and their focus towards something that is not God, something that did nothing for them. He's so angry that it says his rage will consume them. His wrath burns hot. He's furious at what Israel is doing. And like a lot of people who have read the story before, it's astounding how quickly they turned. God had just freed them from slavery, and almost immediately their focus and their worship turns to something physical. God rescued them from slavery. They should be thanking and worshiping and praising God with every breath they have because they are free. And worship is the only appropriate response for what they have been given. They've been given their freedom, and worship is the only appropriate response. And then you kind of stop and think. You pause and you realize that God did the exact same thing for us. For every one of us. Except we weren't saved from Egypt. We weren't brought out of Egypt. We were brought out of sin. We were rescued from eternal death. We were rescued from eternity apart from God, eternity in hell. He saved us. And He saved us because of the attributes that we read in verse 6. It's gracious, long-suffering, abounding in goodness. That's why He saved us. But because He saved us, we should be thanking and worshiping and praising Him with every breath that we get. Because again, that is the only appropriate response for what He's given us. But how often do we turn our attention to things that are not God, things that have done nothing for us? How often do we turn our attention to something that doesn't deserve it nearly as much as the God that gave up His only begotten Son, also that we could be saved? How often? It was said at the lectureship, but I want to say it again just because of how potent it is. But close your eyes and imagine that you could ask for anything, and no matter what, God would give it to you. Now imagine that thing. Would you trade that thing for the blood of Jesus? Would you give it up for salvation? You can't ask for anything better than salvation, than Christ's blood, because there's nothing better to give. We've been given the best gift. And we were given, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 7, quickly, but to each one of us, grace was given according to the measure of Christ's gift. We earned nothing. Christ did everything for us. It was given to us. We were given this perfect, powerful gift of salvation. But again, how often are we like Israel? And after receiving such a wonderful gift, after we have been freed, we turn away from the God that gave it to us. We turn away from Christ, who was so willingly tortured, sacrificed, killed, crucified for us. How often? Like I said earlier, a lot of times when we read Exodus chapter 32, we think to Israel, how could you be so blind? How could you be so foolish? He just took you out of slavery. God just rescued you. He saved you. How could you so quickly turn to something so physical? How could you make this idol? And then you look in the mirror. You see that we do the same thing daily. And God sees us. How could you do this? How could you be so blind? How could you be so foolish? I saved you. I took you out of sin. I gave my son for you. That is God's jealousy. He said, how could you worship anything else? How could I not be on your minds and your hearts constantly? After all I've done, that is God's jealousy. He's jealous because he is gracious, merciful, abounding in goodness, like it says in verse 6. Something else to take note of here is that God is no less angry at us when we turn our attention away from God than he was at Israel. God is a just judge. We see that in Psalm 7, verse 11. And he is still a jealous God. Right, it said after chapter 6, or after a few chapters after 32, chapter 34, verse 14, he is jealous. God will not judge us differently. He's not less angry when we commit the same sin as Israel. When their focus left God. God still demands the same attention. He still demands the same worship. And the same thing still displeases God. God is not pleased with your worship just on Sunday morning. He's not pleased with just half your heart worshiping him at any given time. He's not pleased when you're prioritizing work or relationships or anything over him. God demands your whole attention, your whole worship all the time. That doesn't mean that you can't leave the church building. It doesn't mean that you can't stop singing, you can't stop worshiping like you do here. It just means keep God in your mind constantly. Keep God in your heart continuously. And praise him, worship him with your thoughts, worship him with your actions, worship him with your words. Because again, there is no other appropriate response to what we've been given. Cash mentioned it, but there's no reason, or we should not have been saved. We don't deserve it. Like I said, we have earned nothing. It was given to us. And when you realize and read the accounts of the crucifixion, and you think about all the things that Christ went through, all the pain he endured, and what that means for us, what a profound impact it has on our lives, on our eternal life. There is no other response that we can even think about having than praising him and worshiping him with every breath that we give, because we are now free. There's no other response that we can give. This afternoon, if you have not accepted that perfect, powerful gift, that blood of Christ, and you want to be saved, because you want to spend the rest of your life praising God and in response to what he's done for you, you can be baptized, you can be saved today. If you have any other